One language that I never planned to learn is the language of sign. But my husband and I did learn sign language because our oldest son is deaf, and that's how we communicate with him. But we're very, very lucky because a dear friend of ours, who's also a lyricist and composer, her name is Carol Wechter, and she happens to be here tonight. So I'm very, very honored and thrilled that she's here because she wrote this song and I sang it for Philip's bar mitzvah. The ark is opening, the word is passing through. The word our people have been passing down to you. This is your heritage, your history. We offer you the word in words that you can sing. We came to your world of silence. Still our voices harmonize. Graceful fingers dance the love we feel for you as we listen with our eyes. The stillness of your world was met by all our fears. The stillness of your world brought anger filled with tears. Then we found poetry we never knew, a moving poetry of life because of you. We can't hear your world of silence. Still our voices harmonize. Graceful fingers dance the love we feel for you as we listen with our eyes. The ark is opening, the word is passing through. The blessings are ringing out, so old and yet so new. Your brother turns to you, he signs shalom. Blessings abound for us in our sons, our home. We can't hear your world of silence. Still our voices harmonize. Graceful fingers dance the love we feel for you as we listen with our eyes. We can't hear your world of silence. Still our voices harmonize. Graceful fingers dance the love we feel for you as we listen with our eyes. As we listen with our eyes, as we listen with our eyes. Thank you.
Diagweev Galera Cordia, August Tawfoil wrote, welcome to Be My Guest with me, Mary Honan, on Lear Media TV, supporting the Samaritans, Limerick and Tipperary. And my very special guest today is the lovely Naomi Miller. And Naomi has a wonderful story. As you've probably gathered by now, my research was on literature about childhood under Nazism. And lately I've been interviewing, for a long time actually, I've been interviewing survivors, children of survivors, and people working in the area of Holocaust education. And my guest here today is Naomi Miller from New Jersey. And she's going to tell us her wonderful story and about her parents' experiences and her parents' background. Hi, Naomi.
Hi. So nice to meet you.
It's
I like
very
your
nice.
Jersey accent.
I'm getting the New Jersey all the way from Ireland.
Well, then you have to come and visit.
I was in New Jersey. I judged Irish dancing in New Jersey.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, I happen to love all kinds of folk dancing, including Irish dancing. I heard your previous interview. My husband and I were folk dancers, and you said that you were a talker and your teacher yelled at you, right?
That's right. No, my teacher threw me out of the class.
Oh.
She sent me home.
She threw you out. Guess what? I was thrown out too.
I had to get 2 buses and walk about a mile to get the 2 buses. And I wasn't even talking. Not on that occasion.
Oh, well, I got kicked out, but
I was always talking. But you know, my mama had a saying: if you have the name of staying out all night, you can be in bed early and nobody will believe you. But I had the reputation of being a chatterbox. So,
well, and here you are hosting a radio show.
I am.
It worked.
It worked. But Naomi, tell me about your connection to the Shoah or the Holocaust.
So, my father was married before he met my mother. His wife and 2 boys were murdered by the Nazis.
Oh, God Almighty.
And he tells the story of the fact that he actually stood there watching his wife and 2 boys get on the train. And he wanted to join them. But there was a Nazi who held him back, and he kept saying, but I just want to give my children bonbons, candy. He knew what was going to happen to them. That story just stuck with me. So he survived Dachau concentration camp.
Mm.
My mother worked in an ammunition factory.
Okay.
I didn't know too much about where the factory was, but I actually wrote a song that has not been given a melody yet. And the song is about how does someone make bullets to kill their own people? Because she knew that if she didn't do it right, she would be murdered right there on the spot. And yet she also knew that she was making bullets for the murder of her own people. And that stuck with me. I was born after the war in a displaced persons camp in Landsberg, Germany.
Mm.
That's where my father met my mother. My father was in charge of giving out rooms in the DP camp, which originally was the barracks for the Nazis. So he meets my mother, and they get married, and I'm born. And we come to America when I'm 1.5 years.
Oh, okay.
We come to New York City. And we were sponsored by an agency called Hayas. Are you familiar with it?
No, can't say again.
It is still in existence. Pardon me?
How is it spelled?
Well, it's an acronym, I believe that's the right word, HIAS.
Holocaust.
No. Let me see. I have some notes about it because they actually sent me my entire file. When my parents came to America, they had to meet with Hayas. I'm going to have to look it up for you because I'm looking at all the notes and it doesn't really tell you what it is, but it's still in existence. And at the end of the Holocaust, they were helping to sponsor.
HIAS is HIAS is the United Nations Holocaust Rescue. It's to do with take action for refugees and asylum seekers. So they're involved with bringing asylum seekers and refugees into countries.
So they sponsored us. They helped to bring us here. We arrived. They gave us clothing. They gave us money. They found housing for us. It was sort of glorious. And what I mean by that is that...
you knew nothing else?
No, and I was a year and a half old. I didn't even speak English. I spoke Yiddish. It was my first language.
It's very like, sorry for interrupting you, Yiddish would be very like German.
Yes.
But it's almost like a dialect of German.
Yes.
It was, I know from my research that a lot of people were killed in the camps for speaking Yiddish because it was considered to be, it basically told people that somebody was Jewish by the fact that they were speaking Yiddish. But also it was, a lot of people were killed first who spoke only Yiddish and couldn't speak German and couldn't understand the orders that were being given to them because they only spoke Yiddish or they only spoke Greek. The Greeks were the first, the Greek Jews were the first to be exterminated in many of the camps because they didn't speak Yiddish and they didn't speak German. So they didn't know when they were being told what to do. So yeah, it's a language. It's a very interesting language, Yiddish.
Beautiful.
You sing in Yiddish as well. You sing in Yiddish. You sing
Absolutely.
in Yiddish.
I love, I'm passionate about this language to the point where I am now teaching at a university actually via Zoom. And I started what I'm calling an intergenerational Yiddish class. And so I have parents, children, grandparents, and it's delightful. But I wanted to go back to being in America. And my father, my parents had 4 children in America. I was the oldest and the only one born in Germany. The rest, of course, were born here in America. They didn't, this is very common. A lot of parents who went through the Holocaust did not talk about it to their children. And I can understand, partially being a mother myself, you don't want to tell your children about atrocities and horrors. So part of it was a protection. And, you know, they just didn't talk about it. So fast forward. In 1976, my first child was born. Turns out that he's deaf.
Oh, that's right. Yes, you have.
Well, it was very difficult for me. I couldn't believe it because our whole world was turned upside down, wondering how in the world are we going to help this child live in a hearing world.
But you did.
Well, we did, but what happened was my son was put into a special program. And in order to participate in the program, we had to also participate in counseling. And so we did. I went to see this woman who counseled me twice a week. And she said to me, you know, you're crying, but your crying seems a little bit over the top. Something else is going on with you. And I told her I was a child of survivors and I didn't make any connection telling, about my son being deaf and being a child of survivors. Anyway, I found myself being in bed a lot, crying. And one day she called my husband and she said, I want you to read, I'm going to recommend a book. I want you to read it first and then give it to Naomi.
Mm.
So this book was written by Helen Epstein.
Mm.
It's called Children of Survivors.
Mm.
I read the book and I could not believe it. I was on every page, everything that other children of survivors had never talked about out loud to anybody.
Mm.
I was there. And I was astounded that, because I grew up, when we moved to New Jersey, I attended a yeshiva, a parochial school, a Jewish parochial school. Oh no, I'm sorry. Let me just hang up this number. And there were many children of survivors in my class, but everybody seemed so happy. I wasn't happy, neither were my siblings, and certainly weren't my parents. They were not. There were survivors who figured out how to make a living in this country. My father he was a phenomenal mechanic, a phenomenal plumber, but he was not a businessman. So we lived paycheck to paycheck. My mother was a stay-at-home mom, so there just wasn't any money coming in. And on top of that, my parents were always fighting.
Yeah.
My parents, they married out of desperation.
Mm.
It was not true love. It was to start a new life.
Comfort.
Right? Yes.
And people who had similar experiences finding a connection.
Right.
And sometimes that connection, if you actually read Vladek or Art Spiegelman's book Mouse, okay, he's done it in a graphic form. It won a Pulitzer Prize because it was a novel, a memoir, a graphic novel. It was fact and fiction in that he used mice to represent his parents, and he used pigs to represent the Poles, and he used frogs to represent the French. He stereotyped the characters the way they would have been stereotyped. And he talked about the lack of a relationship he had with his dad, and how his father and his second wife never had a good relationship because they had too much in common. They were both constant reminders to each other of what his first wife died in the camp. She committed suicide. His first son died in the camp. Much similar to your situation with your parents, your father remarrying. He remarried and they had too much in common. And she was a constant reminder, and he was a constant reminder of what they had lost. So perhaps that's what was the situation with your parents, and that's why they found it. You'd imagine they should be united because of having a shared history, but that sometimes can actually tear them apart.
It didn't work for us. My mother was grieving her entire life. Although I have to say, later in life, my parents divorced, by the way. They divorced the month that my husband and I got married, of all time.
Oh, wow. God.
My mother had a little nervous breakdown after that divorce, because now, every life is totally different. I felt guilty, very guilty, because I was embarking on a wonderful life. I had a job, my husband had a job, we were going to make it. and my mother wasn't going to make it, and my father disappeared. She had a little breakdown. I took her to a psychiatrist, and he puts her on an antidepressant called Paxil. In 3 weeks, my mother's personality changed. She was a little happier. She was telling jokes. And for the first time, she says, Naomi, do you love me? I said, of course, Ma. I love you. And I thought, oh my God. She never said, I love you. She never hugged me. She never, it was difficult growing up. And I have to admit that I was also in therapy. After reading Children of the Holocaust, I called Helen Epstein, the author, and I said, I'm in trouble because I'm constantly crying. Anita, my counselor, tells me that there's something else going on. And when I read your book, I realized that I was not just grieving the loss of my son's hearing, I was grieving something else. Do you know of a therapist? She sends me to a therapist. And the first session that I had, laying on the couch, I just couldn't stop crying.
Yeah.
And I said to this therapist, well, what's happening with me? She said, you're grieving the loss of what would have been a normal childhood, a normal set of parents. And boy, that was a journey. It started an interesting journey for me because I learned a lot. I learned quite a lot.
I don't think any of us have what you could call normal childhood, even those of us who didn't have parents who were survivors. But I mean, I have a friend, Toba Abramczyk, who's in Toronto. Her dad, Meyer, was a survivor of 5 camps. Now, he did talk about the Holocaust, and friends of his and other survivors became the family he lost during the war because
right.
they had so much in common. But it's so interesting that in one hand you can have Myra Abramczyk, who has all his Holocaust friends who become suddenly his friends and his family, and they become her aunts and uncles, even though technically they're not anything to her, but they're all connected through this experience. And yet you have Vladek Spiegelman and Art Spiegelman and his wife, who can't get on because of their shared experiences.
Right.
People go through it differently. And I think did you have people you could talk to in the family about it?
No, because my siblings and I didn't talk about it. My friends who were children of survivors who were better off than me, whose parents figured out how to create a business here in America, who became successful. We weren't successful. In fact, we lived in a town called Paterson in New Jersey, and we were very poor. So my father ended up being the maintenance man for a mikveh. Do you know what a mikveh is? It's a Jewish ritual bath for women, especially women.
Oh, yeah.
Who have to cleanse themselves after their period. This building had an apartment above the mikveh. So the mikveh was like a pool. And my mother would supervise the women who had to dunk themselves in this pool and say a prayer. Anyway.
They would be Hasidic Jews. Orthodox Jews.
Even some conservative Jews.
Really?
It is a tradition that many Jewish women will observe prior to getting married.
Oh, okay.
It is also used for conversion. So if a woman were to convert, she would have to go to the mikveh first.
Okay.
And that could even be in a reform situation. But the Orthodox community owned that building, and they offered it to my parents rent-free if my father maintained the building, the mikveh, and my mother took care of the women. So we lived there for many years rent-free. And I just never felt comfortable talking to my other friends about my situation. And I never really felt like I fit in either, because they were wealthier, they were more normal, they didn't have parents who were fighting. No, they didn't have it in my observations, and I was jealous and I was angry. But fast forward, I decided that in my singing career, which has lasted since I'm age 16 to the present, I incorporated also, my husband and I wrote a show dedicated to the Holocaust. It's called You Are the Future. One of the first songs that was written for me by my friend Carol Wechter, who's a lyricist and composer. I told her a story that I accompanied my mother every Yom HaShoah, every Holocaust Remembrance Day. I would accompany my mother to a commemoration. We would sit in the audience as survivors got up on the stage and told their stories. And I would start crying hysterically. And my mother sat there, not one tear.
Yeah.
And I thought, what? How could you not be crying? It's conjuring up everything that happened. So anyway, I talked to Carol. She writes a song. And I flagged it in my script because I thought it is absolutely an incredible song. Let me see if I can find it. I'm sorry.
You've been singing in Broadway musicals, and you've been singing jazz, and you sing every kind of musical and every kind of, every genre of music you've been doing for many, many years now.
Many years.
And,
yeah.
And there's a connection between you as well and Dr. Inga Auerbacher, in that you've sung some of Inga's songs.
Yes. I'm going to tell you about that.
I've interviewed Inga twice, but once when in a previous incarnation, audio only. But I interviewed her recently. I'm sure you've seen the interview.
I did,
and that was on camera. But she's a remarkable woman.
Oh, remarkable! But I want to go back to this song that Carol wrote. I was so excited. It was all about my mother. And there was a verse in there about the fact that everybody was crying but her. So I go to my mother's apartment. I go, Ma, I have to sing this song to you. Well, I started singing and I cried through the whole thing.
Yeah.
And at the end, I thought my mother was going to kiss me and say, oh my goodness, what a wonderful song. She says, what happened to the melody? There's no melody. And there was a melody, but I couldn't sing the melody. I was crying. It was just amazing.
You sound like, when you were saying that there, all I could hear of when you said, Ma, all I could think of was, do you remember Rona Morgenstern in Rhoda?
Yes.
When she used to say to her mother in the series, Ma,
That's how I talk to her, Ma.
It's just, and then you did you find music was your way through? Did you find music a form of therapy, and do you still find it a form of therapy, an escapism, a way that you can actually, because I mean, I know as a writer and as an artist, and that you can pour out. Often, you know, you can delve into what you're creating, and it can actually be used as a form. I suppose in some respects these interviews are a form of escapism as well from what's going on around us.
Absolutely.
You know, do you find that, and it's probably a leading question, that your music has become that escape, that other world that you've created to become the Naomi Miller that you are now? What was your maiden name? What was your name before Miller?
My maiden name was Calka, C-A-L-K-A, a very unusual name that, you know, you'd never know it was a Jewish name. It wasn't like Bernstein or...
but you would know Naomi was biblical.
Oh, yes. So, Mary, I want to tell you that my husband passed away in January, a year ago, January.
Oh, Naomi.
This Sunday is his the
first year.
He was January 10th. My husband and I were like peas in a pod. He loved theater and music. He loved my career. He wrote all of my scripts. He encouraged me. He did. I can't even explain to you the relationship that we had. It was just a beautiful, beautiful marriage.
You threw everything into your marriage. You threw everything into all your hopes and dreams were thrown into your marriage.
Absolutely. But the fact that he loved my career and participated, he never missed a show. So when he became very, very, very ill, and we never said the word die, but one day he said to me, if anything happens to me, I want you to promise me two things. One, that you'll keep singing, and two, that you'll be okay. Well, he gave me a gift, because when you're grieving, you're not going to sing Broadway show tunes. You're not going to sing happy songs. You can't. But he gave me a gift. He said, do it. And so last March would have been our 50th anniversary. And I launched my first Facebook Live show dedicated to our 50th anniversary. It was joyful. It was exciting. And there were so many viewers that I just couldn't believe it. So I haven't stopped. And every show that I do, I dedicate to him. So he's sort of with me. And therapy, what would I do if I didn't have songs to sing right now? Because I don't have anybody here really. No, my family, well, I don't have aunts, uncles, grandparents, cousins, okay? They're all gone.
Yeah.
So all that I have, my youngest sister, my grandson, my two boys. My oldest son lives in Rochester. He's the one who's deaf. Rochester, New York is 6-7 hours away from here. My youngest lives in Maryland. With COVID, we're not seeing each other. So what do I do with the loneliness?
You sing.
I sing. My accompanist comes to the house. He's the only one that's allowed in here. And we rehearse, we laugh, we sing, we create. Unfortunately, when he leaves, it's almost like a switch, you know? Yeah. I feel it again, that emptiness. But I always say, my Harvey gave me a gift. If he didn't tell me to sing, I wouldn't have. I would have felt like I couldn't do that, you know?
It's a bit, in a sense, like I sense, you know, a bit like the Celine Dion's life. When you look at what her life was, her whole life was consumed with her husband.
Yes.
And when Renée Angeli died, you know, I mean, the pain on her face at the funeral, if you look up her video of her funeral, was palpable. I mean, it really was. I mean, she had lost everything. He was her manager, he was her friend, he was her husband, and
Exactly.
everything was taken from her. Even though she knew he was dying, nothing prepares you for when it happens, because you're losing everything. You're losing almost like your soul when somebody like that who's so involved in your life, in every aspect of your life.
Every aspect.
You know,
we were dancers, folk dancers, ballroom dancers, and he loved my music. I'm gonna be Zooming with my accompanist and his wife on Saturday, and I'm going to reminisce with them about how my husband would be sitting in his office, and I'd be rehearsing in another room, and he would rush in during the rehearsal and say, "What are you doing? You're yelling that song. Now soften it up." Or he'd say, "You sound off key." And I would say, "Shut up." And we were like that. We were like a comedy routine. I was teaching Yiddish live at a senior center. And I wasn't very tech savvy, so I had my husband come and run my PowerPoint. Well, toward the end, one of the lessons that I was teaching is how to teach commands to a dog in Yiddish. And before Harvey got sick, I bought a hat that had ears. It was a dog costume, like a doggy hat with big eyes over here. He's actually on my phone with that costume. And I said, he didn't really want to get out of bed. He was so sick. And I said, "Harvey, you have to go." I don't know if you can see this picture.
Okay. Oh, Lord.
He's already pale. He said, "I'm not going. I am not going." I said, "Harvey, I already bought the hat. I'm not wearing it because I'm teaching. You have to go." So, I just wanted to get him out of bed.
Yeah.
I didn't want him just laying there withering away. And my class loved him because we had the banter. That's what I was trying to get at when I said to him, "Shut up." Well, it was that way in the Yiddish class too. I'd say, "Harvey, I'm the teacher. Would you please, you just do the PowerPoint." And then he would throw something back at me. And we became like a comedy routine too. And it was just such a delightful
How long were you married?
It would have been 50 years in last March.
But
this March.
In many respects, Harvey was put in your way and in your reach to get you through life.
Oh, absolutely. In the years when we discovered that my son was deaf, and I had a little breakdown because remember I said I was in bed a lot. I couldn't get out of bed. I was crying all the time, and I thought, Harvey's all I have. Is he going to leave me because I'm nuts? I thought I was nuts. He stood by me with all of my pain, with all of my angst, with all of my therapy. Therapy was hard because it was a revelation. Learning about the therapy, actually, it was hard, but it ended up really good because I finally asked my parents what happened. And at that point in our lives, my parents felt, "Okay, I'm going to tell you, you're a big girl now. You can hear it." And, by the time I decided to ask them, I didn't have enough time to find out everything.
Yeah.
Because my father, how did he survive? Well, I know that he made blueprints, but he didn't tell me for what. So, you fantasize. If my mother was making bullets to kill her own people, was my father creating blueprints for the Nazis? For what? He never said. So
Yeah,
I don't know.
he would have had to. I mean, they were put to work and they used people according to their abilities. So obviously your father was a technical person. The fact that he was a mechanic and the fact that he was a technical person, they would have used people who were of importance to them.
Right.
And you daren't not do what they told you.
Exactly. Exactly. So, my parents were both traumatized in their own ways. I mean, they reacted to the trauma in their own ways. So my father was a workaholic, came home at night and smelly from work, and he'd say, Ruju, what's for dinner? He called my mother Ruju. That was her Polish name. And she cooked.
Polish Jews.
Yes. My parents were born in Lodz, Poland. They were in the Lodz ghetto. They didn't know each other then.
Yeah.
My mother saw her father starve to death.
Did your father meet your mother after the war or during it?
After, at a DP camp.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Landsberg, Germany. I told you he was giving out the rooms.
Yeah.
And my mother was attractive.
And did he know at that stage that his wife, his first wife, had died?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Because I became very friendly with a woman who, Dr. Inga Auerbacher, no, Dr. Helena Ganner, I should say. And Dr. Helena Ganner is living in San Francisco. She's in California, but she is originally from Poland. And she survived the war as a 12-year-old on her own. And she was protected by a Polish prostitute and by a Jewish doctor. And she was protected also by a Catholic, the Reverend Mother of a convent, who baptized, helped her to make her communion so that she could disguise her as a Catholic in order to hide. And finally by a Nazi officer who saw her hiding behind a curtain when they were walking into the room with soldiers, and he said, "Keine Juden here." And there are no Jews here. And he walked out. And she has no idea why he did that, or whether she was the only person he saved, or what was the motivation, but she was grateful. She wrote anyway about 4 letters to the witness of my childhood. And afterwards, after the war, her sister and her mother died, and her father after the war met a Russian woman and married, and she adored her stepmother, absolutely adored her. Alexandrovna was her name, was the surname, Alexandrovna. But she absolutely adored her. And it's interesting that he didn't know his wife had died and children, but by the end of the war, they realized, everyone, that they were gone, but it was never confirmed to him when he met Olga Alexandrovna and remarried. But your father definitely knew that your mom was dead, that your previous wife was dead.
Yes, definitely.
That must have played on his mind as well all the time, that, what happened her, the fact that she was taken away, the saying goodbye to his children and never seeing them again. And exactly. Your mother had similar experiences, and their 2 worlds were brought together because of this, but yet torn apart because of it. Exactly.
It was not a marriage made in heaven. They just, like I said, married to keep each other company. You know, they had 4 children, but they had difficulty parenting us. My father was working, my mother, and they weren't getting along, and my mother was grieving. I was the oldest, and for the most part, I took care of my mother with her. First of all, I always felt guilty. I didn't want to be happy.
Yeah.
You know, my best friend, my childhood friend, Marilyn, she remembers that one day I was sitting in my gorgeous home. We owned a house. And I looked in my backyard and it was gorgeous. It was absolutely gorgeous. Beautiful trees, huge backyard. And I said, I don't deserve this.
Yeah.
I cannot enjoy this. I didn't enjoy my honeymoon. The guilt was so strong. I could not allow myself to be happy. And it took years and years of therapy and introspection and forgiveness to bring me to where I am now, where I really did not like my mother. I kept thinking, Ma, come on, you have 4 children. Can you laugh? Can you joke with us? Can you?
But you
She
loved
wouldn't.
her.
Yeah, but and now I realize she did the best that she could. But then I was a teenager, you know.
Yeah.
It's different when you're a teenager. You know, like I see my friends now who have daughters, and the daughters call their mothers every single day.
I
And
called my
mommies,
mother every
moms,
day. I
do you
called
have
my mother
children?
4 times a day.
Of course. But I couldn't call my mother because if I did call her. I'd say, Ma, how you doing? Well, this hurts. My back hurts. My head hurts. My knee hurts. There was never a conversation
I know. I know.
where that was a happy one. And I would hang up saying,
I'm sorry I rang.
yeah. And you know, this song I was telling you about, it's called Gentle Memories, that was written for my mother. And it says, if I could, I would give you gentle memories, painted with ribbons of springtime bouquet. But all I can do is stand close to you, each Yom HaShoah. And so it was a promise that I uphold to this day as a second generation, that the Holocaust will always be a part of my mission to the world. And so my Holocaust program, which includes songs that Inga Auerbacher wrote.
Inga, yeah.
Inga, she's an amazing woman. I met her. I was singing at an outdoor festival. This goes back decades. She heard me sing and she approached me afterwards and she says, you know, I've written some poetry that were put to music and your voice is suited to these songs. And I said, really? Okay. Well, that's how our friendship started.
She wrote a very beautiful poem that I used in my doctoral thesis, and it's called "I'm a Star."
I have the book.
And no, but the actual poem of it.
I'm going to have.
And it, it kind of talks about the fact that, for a long time people didn't, there is an actual, there's a book called A Little Boy Star. It's an allegory and it's written for children to try and introduce them to the concept of it. And the little boy is constantly called a star, and he thinks it's a compliment because he thinks he's been told, but he doesn't realize that this is the worst thing he can possibly be, is a star. And but there is one that I was thinking of that I think you should read, and it's called Ruth Eisenstein's book, and it was I was a child of Holocaust survivors, and Ruth Eisenstein is remarkable.
Write that down.
In that she talks about how the Holocaust became a drug for her. It was almost like she kept calling it that H became the drug that she needed to constantly inject into her veins so that she could have more and more and more of her parents' stories. And the more she found out about their lives and their friends' lives, the more she needed to know about their lives. So it became almost like so that she got this, as she said, this high that she experienced every time she injected H into her veins. And
Wow.
And it's just, and she said she never knew where their lives ended and their stories ended and her life began, because her whole world was wrapped up in her parents' sorrow, their experiences, their trauma, and she wanted to learn more and more and more and more. And she never felt that anything that she would suffer in her life would ever compare to her parents' survival. The fact that they had survived what they survived was just so far beyond anything that she would ever do in her life. And it reminds me of what you said when you looked out your window and you saw your beautiful garden. And as beautiful as it was, that beauty would never compare to what your parents had suffered and what
Right.
you were losing as a result of what your parents had suffered.
Right.
So you should read that book, because
I wrote down the name.
I do think it's Eisenstein, S-T-E-I-N.
One of the things that is a common thread for some children of survivors is that our parents minimized things that were happening in our lives. So, for example, my mother would say, "Why are you crying from your son, my deaf son? Why are you crying? Look what happened to me."
Yeah.
Well, that was a common theme in our household. I couldn't come home and say, I got bullied at school, so look what happened to me. It was a common thing that she said. And, in my teenage years, I couldn't forgive her for that.
Yeah, I know what you're
And I
saying.
stopped confiding in her. I didn't want to hear, look what happened to me. So I would talk to other people about it that I felt close to and that would understand what I was going through. And of course, my years of therapy certainly matured me very quickly and made me really understand what they went through. Now, like I said, not only do I forgive my parents because they only did the best that they could, I decided about 8 years ago to go to Poland. If my mother was alive now, she would say, "How dare you? How dare you?" Like I was a traitor. You cannot go back to Poland because the Poles were as bad as the Nazis. I didn't, it could be true. It was true, okay, but I was doing a Holocaust program at a college, and there was a girl crying through my entire presentation, and it was very distracting. When it was over, I went to the ladies' room, and there she was, crying hysterically. I said, "I have to ask you, what is going on with you?" She says, "I feel so guilty. I'm German. I feel so guilty." I said, "Listen,
It's not her fault.
you didn't do this. You didn't do this. I am begging you to rethink how you're feeling about this. You didn't do this." And that was my motivation. I had to go to Poland, and we went on a Jewish heritage tour. And there are several leaders in the Jewish community who are trying to revive the Jewish community and bridge the gap to get the Polish people who were anti-Semites or may still be anti-Semites to understand us, to enjoy us. I did 2 shows in Krakow at that time. And I had my entire show on PowerPoint translated into Polish. I had an interpreter so that when I was being spontaneous and joking, the interpreter would tell the audience what I was saying. And in the beginning of the show, I said, how many of you here understand Yiddish? Nothing. I found out later, my 2 shows, there were no Jews in the audience at all. And what I found out was that Jewish music in Europe is highly regarded, is loved. Klezmer music, you know, it's just such a joyful, fun
It is. It is.
kind of music that they loved it. They absolutely loved it.
Before the parade passes by, I want to go and taste Saturday's highlight. This show celebrates legendary performers who are age 60 and above. I call this phenomenon schmaging. Shake your body, baby, do the conga. No, you can't control yourself any longer. If you want to do the conga, you've got to listen to the beat. Keep it going. Shake your body, baby, do the conga. Repeat after me. Dolores. Very nice. Conchita. Figueroa. Del Rivero. What am I talking about? Cheetah! Come on, babe, we're gonna paint the town. And all that jazz, I'm gonna rouge my knees, roll my pantyhose down. And all that jazz, sing us a song, you're the piano man. Sing us a song tonight, while we're all in the mood for a melody. And you've got us feeling alright. Come home at 2:45. Would you lock the door? Would you still need me? Would you still feed me when I'm 64? Would you still need me? Or would you still feed me when I'm 74? I could fly higher than an eagle, 'cause you are the wind beneath my wings. We're both the same age. We both have big voices. She owns a theme park. I once threw up in a theme park. Working 9 to 5, what a way to make a living, barely getting by. It's all taken and no giving, they just use your mind and they never give you credit. It's enough to drive you crazy if you let it. I'm gonna raise the roof, I'm gonna carry on. Give me an old trombone, give me an old baton before the parade. Thank you.
So, my mission, aside from going there, I always said to my husband, I'll go to Poland if I can perform, because it's going to be bittersweet. I'm going to be visiting concentration camps. We went to Auschwitz. I found it much too clean, much too sterile. like my mother would have said, this is nothing. This isn't what it was like. It was just too clean. Theresienstadt. That's where Inga
Inga was in
was.
Theresienstadt.
I was there. I sang in the theater where the children of Theresienstadt sang.
Mm.
It was too clean. They showed us a room with bunk beds where children slept. And yes, I know that they were supposed to be a model for the Red Cross.
Mm.
So they made it look good. When I sent my boys when I sent my boys to overnight camp here in America, the bunk beds in Theresienstadt looked better than what my kids were experiencing in their bunks. Clean, bed was made. It was, I was so turned off by the cleansing of Auschwitz, cleansing of Theresienstadt. And like my mother says, this is not what it was like. So.
But you continue now to integrate that into your music, into your shows, and how's that going?
Well, during COVID, I lost all of my paying jobs.
Yeah.
And I started, since March, I have performed maybe 10 varied one-woman shows. And Harvey would be very proud of me because...
I'd say no matter what you do, Harvey would be proud of you. Saying,
well,
listen to me.
I branched out there, I was stereotyped as the Jewish Yiddish singer. Well, guess what? My last show was called Rock and Roll Grandma. So, wouldn't you know, I integrated my mother into the show. My mother is gone many years, but
she's everywhere in your life.
Yeah, I can mimic her accent. So, in the middle of the first song that I sang in Rock and Roll Grandma was an Elvis Presley song. And all of a sudden, my mother comes in. She says, "Why are you singing for Elvis? Elvis pelvis. He's shaking his tuchus this way and that way. Tuchus is your rear end, And so I loved it. I loved the idea of bringing my mother into the show because in the 50s and 60s, as teenagers, we had crushes on these singers like Elvis, and
I still
my mother.
I still do. I love Elvis.
How do you like that?
Elvis. Love.
Since my baby left me, I found a new place to dwell. It's down at the end of Lonely Street at Heartbreak Hotel. Now, my mother sang it like this. Then my boo-boo left me. I found a new place to dwell. It's down by the end of the Renzi Street by Heartbreak's Hotel. And that's how I introduced her into my show. So now I'm writing another show. It's called Rock and Roll Grandma in the 60s. So it's still in the writing stages. And the reason I bring Harvey in is because every time I finish the show, he'd say, okay, time to learn new songs. I go, Harvey, I'm in my 70s. I can't remember anything. I can't remember lyrics. Don't pressure me. Come on, you can do this. Well, here I am. Not only I'm breaking that stereotype, sort of, because there's always going to be Yiddish and my Jewishness comes out in any show that I do. So, for example, in the new show, the genre of the 60s, there were so many different types of music. There was protest music.
Yeah.
There were love songs. There was folk music. And so I lost my train of thought.
There
What
was
was I
folk
saying?
music in the 60s and 50s.
I was trying to figure out how I could get my mother. Oh, I remember what I said. That my Judaism, my love of being Jewish is so strong that it permeates any show that I do, even if it's rock and roll. So Joan Baez,
Yeah,
do you
John
remember?
Baez.
Okay, Joan Baez and Theodore Bickel recorded a song called Dona Dona.
Mm.
I love that song. And even though there is nothing Jewish about this rock and roll in the 60s, I'm going to sing the English and Yiddish version.
So,
Of
so
Dona. Are you
would you
ready?
like to sing the Yiddish version for us of Joan Baez's song?
Sure, here it goes. Oi Faforu liegt da Kälbel, liegt gebunden mit a Strick. Heuch in Himmel flieht durch Felbel, freit sich, dreht sich hin und zurück. Lacht der Wind in Korn, lacht und lacht und lacht. Lacht der Upatug a ganzen und a halbe Nacht. Dona, 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 Dona. Dona, 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 Dona. Dona, 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 Dona. Dona, 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 Dona. So that's just part of the song.
That's wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful. You've had a very varied life. Have you ever gone down the acting route?
Oh,
You haven't
absolutely.
gone down the comedy genre.
Oh, yes, I have. All right, where shall I start? First of all, there is the Yiddish National Theater called Volksbühne in New York that has been revived in the past, I would say, 20 years. I was working full-time as a speech language therapist in the school system, so I couldn't audition for their main stage shows, which required daily rehearsals in New York, and here I was in New Jersey. However, they also did staged readings, and what that meant was they would do a play and cast all of us. It was all in Yiddish. The rehearsals were after my school hours, so I could get into New York and rehearse, and then we would perform in different colleges, different venues. And it was great because I had the script in front of me, and my roles ranged from some were comedic, some were very, very serious. I've always wanted to be an actress. Do you know who Tova Feldshuh is?
No.
She is a very famous actress in America. She did a Broadway show called Golda's Balcony. And that was a one-woman show where she portrayed Golda Meir.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway,
Golda Meir.
she had a master class 2 weekends in her house. How to act a song. Our assignment was, now mind you now, this is Tova Feldshuh, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm in a celebrity's house. I can't get over this. The assignment was go home, prepare 2 songs. One is a ballad and one is comedic. We come back to her house. There's about 10 of us in her living room. And she says, who wants to go first? Before she even finished the sentence, I wanted to get it over with. I was so nervous. And I sang my ballad. And again, I cried through the whole thing. She turns around to the class and she says, you see this? I would hire this woman. Now, the class is over, everybody leaves. I said, Tova, I cried because I was scared out of my mind. It had nothing to do with the song. I
Doesn't
said,
matter.
will I ever be able to duplicate this? She said, absolutely. Anyway, I started taking private lessons with her. I have taken many, many improv classes. The reason that I love taking improv acting classes is because I'm very spontaneous on stage. I never know what's going to come out of my mouth. And that's what I love about the spontaneity. And so in order to keep that up, taking improv, which is very intense, because, you know, they throw things at you and you've got to come up with something with immediately. You can't pre-plan anything. It just has to come out. And so I love it. I love it. Taking acting classes now, unfortunately, because of COVID, there's nothing available. There are some classes available online, but I don't necessarily trust it because I don't know who these people are, and I'm afraid to spend the money right now.
Yeah.
But, you know, when I'm singing, when I'm performing, whether it's comedy or not,
You're just a natural born performer.
well, I hope so.
No, but
You know, I'm in my 70s now, and sometimes I get scared. Like, will the voice last? Will my spontaneity last? I haven't done a live show since COVID. So I don't know, you know, I have done Zoom shows that were live.
Yeah.
But I didn't have the audience connection. You know, like I'm thinking about something comedic that happened. I was singing for a very large audience. And in the middle of my song, a man gets up and he's walking out. And I stopped singing. I said, where are you going? He says, I'll be right back. I said, okay. When he came back, I said, you missed the whole song. I'm doing it again. And, you know, it was little things like that that thrill me because I get excited that I can be that spontaneous and silly. I love to be silly on stage. And, you know, it has kept me going, and it's been my therapy. I don't know what I would do without my music.
Yeah. And I mean, it's sad at this particular time for people who are creative, people who are in the arts, because the arts has been decimated through COVID, more
Absolutely.
So than particular organisation. But Naomi, I must actually tell you, my cousin's daughter is profoundly deaf. She has never heard either, and neither has her husband. And she was part, on the day of her wedding, she was part of a group called Hands in Harmony, and she performed a song for her husband, and it was absolutely.
Did you tape it?
It is on YouTube. I'll try and integrate it into this because it's absolutely beautiful. And she was in her wedding dress, and she was, and the music was playing, and they were doing the sign language, but the whole family. I think it's it should be.
Right where you are, how is your soul? I'm holding down all us, even if the skies get rough. I'm giving you all my love. be someone who walks away so easily. I'm here to stay and make the difference that I can make. Our differences, they do a lot to teach us how to use the tools and gifts we got. Yeah, we got a lot at stake. And in the end, you're still my friend. At least we did intend for us to work. We didn't break, we didn't burn. We had to learn how to bend without the world caving in. I had to learn what I got and what I'm not and who I am. I don't give up on us, even if the skies get rough. I'm giving you all my love. Still looking up, still looking up, but I won't give up on us. God knows I'm tough, we got to learn. Knows we're worth it. I won't give up on us, even if the skies get rough. I'm giving you all my love. I'm still looking up.
I think it should be a compulsory language in every school, from infants up along the line. And
Absolutely. You know, in my school where I taught, my last job as a speech therapist was in a vocational high school. And I had a very large deaf caseload of students. And it was just wonderful because sign language is a beautiful, beautiful language.
beautiful.
The woman Carol Wechter, who wrote the song Gentle Memories, as well as many other original songs for me, she wrote a song about my son. It's called As We Listen with Our Eyes.
Would you be interested in singing us out with that?
Sure.
That would be just, sorry, what were you going to say?
No, I was going to get my hands ready because I'm going to sign the chorus. Okay?
Fabulous.
So you tell me when.
On the before, I would like to thank you, Naomi Miller, for being my super guest today on Be My Guest.
Thank you for inviting me. You're so easy to talk to.
Thank you, Naomi. It was an absolute pleasure. You were very easy to talk to. Also, it's important. I suppose it's important that people feel relaxed enough to talk. But Naomi Miller from New Jersey in the USA, and Naomi, what's not to say about Naomi? You're definitely a woman of many talents and many backgrounds. You should write your book if you haven't started writing it already, but you should. 3 stages. And thank you very much. And Naomi is going to sing us out with a song that was written about your son.
Yes.
Who is profoundly deaf.
Yes. It's called As We Listen with Our Eyes. We can't hear your world of silence, still our voices harmonize. Grateful fingers grace the love we have for you. As we listen with our eyes.
Well, thank you, Naomi.
Thank you, Mary.
Bye
Good to
bye.
meet you.
How do you say goodbye in Yiddish?
Goodbye.
Goodbye.